This is the Surly Grognards for June 4th, 2013. This is Peter Bowman, and as usual, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
Doing all right.
Excellent. So tonight we're going to be talking about our favorite Mythos, Pantheons of gods, and so on and so forth in role-playing games that we've dealt with over the years. It's going to be largely sort of rambling discussion as usual, but, you know, I don't think either of us came up with an actual sort of top 5 list or anything like that this week. Did you?
I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Wait a minute, preparation? What?
I thought about doing it, but I thought, I think we'll just sort of, just do a discussion thing. So as usual, we're doing that, and as always, at the end of the show, we'll be ready to take your questions. If you're listening to us live, you can email us the questions during the show. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com, or you can post them in the chat, and we'll try to get them at the end of the show. So we'll start with it. We'll start off with some. So I want to start off with sort of Eric. How important do you feel Mythos, sort of a Mythos is for a role playing game? Especially, we're probably going to focus mostly on fantasy games because that's where that sort of thing tends to fit in mostly. That's sort of in horror games, I guess, but those tend to have a fantasy element to them to a degree. At least when you're dealing with mythology and such. But so, how important do you feel it is for most games that you've played in that would have them?
It depends on who's playing what, but everyone should have at least a passing familiarity with the active gods in the universe, because it is a fantasy game and religion's kind of important in the Dark Ages.
Right.
You should at least know who you're bitching at when you're cursing at the universe.
Yeah, it's interesting over the years. I mean, I don't know. I despite that, for a long time, I tended to play a lot of clerics in D&D specifically. That was, I think, largely the fact that I was only one of the people who was willing to play them for a long time in the groups I played with. That's due to the fact that clerics, from a sort of gameplay standpoint, for a long time were
the heal bot. That's all they did.
Yeah, kinda. I mean, if you've listened to us talk about 2nd edition D&D before, you've heard me complain about how craptacular the cleric is in 2nd ed, because it really sucks. Oh God. But yeah. So I think it's interestingly enough, I'm not a big fan. I don't find a lot of the sort of the whole mythology, the sort of deities and such that interesting for me. It just almost never seem to grab me. I find I don't end up caring that much about them, which is weird.
That's understandable. I can see that. It's just I don't know. It's mythology is neat, and including a unique mythology in your game world is pretty cool. Or for example, like there's a huge pantheon of gods in, say, Guild Wars 2. But the only race I care about is the Char, and they killed their gods, and they hate the idea of gods. And that informs their worldview a huge amount. It's like, yes, gods exist, but they fucking suck.
All right.
They're as close to atheists as you can get when gods have been proven.
Yeah.
That in itself is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. You can't really be an atheist in most fantasy worlds because there's actual demonstrable proof that gods exist.
Yeah, faith is not so much a question as an empirical fact. So, not an imperial fact, although it could be depending on what world you're playing in.
That's definitely true. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, when I'm thinking about my favorite sort of pantheons and mythos, I'm thinking about the ones that exist for like official game worlds out there, and almost none of them end up grabbing me. Interestingly enough,
I could see that. Like I said, I feel like a mythos in a game world provides excellent background.
Yep.
But like if everyone's playing mercenary scumbags, you don't really need to worry about it too much.
Right. Like, for instance, sort of the stock pantheon of gods in 4th Ed, they use pretty much the ones from, if I remember correctly,
from 3.5.
Well, yeah, it's the Greyhawk sort of standard set. Pelor, the usual set. I just don't find them that interesting. Outside of the ones one of the ones they added in 4th Ed, which was the Raven Queen, who I thought was at first was a much more interesting death god than they usually have. It's like, wow, death isn't evil. My God, well done. And there was early on there's a lot of elements of sort of the death gods I find interesting in various fiction I've read. Like they're not really necessarily gods per se, like Death in Discworld, and I thought that's a more interesting take on death. But then they started expanding her, and I lost a lot of interest in the official Raven Queen with the expansion they did for her.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, I've read some of it. It's like, yeah, oh God. She was more interesting. But she was more interesting when she wasn't as well defined.
Funny how that stuff works.
Yeah. But yeah, so like, I don't really find a lot of those like pantheons particularly. It's like yeah. I mean, I know people who are big into them, like the realms gods. It's like, I mean, well, the realms gods, I really just can't take them seriously because they keep
The ones from Forgotten Realms?
Yeah, because of all the weird sort of, changes and such. It's like, and, oh, look, the gods have changed again.
Yeah, I honestly, Forgotten Realms, every time there's a shift in Edition and Forgotten in Dungeons & Dragons, for some reason Forgotten Realms decides that it needs to do a huge, giant, world-altering, like, mega event.
It's happened every edition that they've had it out.
Yes.
Every time, new edition, the realms blow up. New realms.
New edition, Crisis in Infinite Realms. Let's go. Mm-hmm.
Yep, it really is, and so I just can't focus on them. The Greyhawk gods some of them are okay, but they just don't grab me, and there aren't any gods in Dark Sun because it's Dark Sun.
Because we killed them all.
Well, no, actually, the gods basically said no and sealed Dark Sun away from the rest of the universe. Defiler magic stays there and never goes anywhere else.
This is the baddest idea ever.
No. And so and I honestly couldn't tell you what the mix of deities in any of the other D&D settings are. It's like I don't know Eberron well enough to be able to say what that is there.
The gods in, like, say, Iron Kingdoms, I always go back to Iron Kingdoms when I'm talking about flavor. Doug Seacat, I want to have your man babies. The gods are really interesting and well defined. Like you've got Morrow is very much your sort of classic good guy god, but he's very much about individuality and achieving enlightenment through being not a dick. It's actually really kind of a cool little religion, and he's kept in. But in balance, you have his sister, who's also very much about achieving enlightenment through individuality. But instead of being not a dick and being nice to people and generally supporting one another, Thanos' twin sister is all about like morality of expediency. Do what you need to get ahead. Personal power is my route to enlightenment. And they play off each other really interestingly. Obviously, Thamarites are illegal because their very nature is contrary to an ordered society. But
yeah.
But combined with that, you have like the old gods, Duenia, who's pretty much a nature god and doesn't really have a personality so much as just sort of a pervasive life force.
Okay.
And is referred to often as like the sort of Earth Mother type of deal. The Devourer Worm, who is, well, Dunia is all about the good aspects of nature. The Devourer Worm is all about the destructive aspects of nature.
Right.
And Menoth, who is all about law and order. And Menoth is supposed to have been the creator of mankind. And hence has a very large human following, and Menites run the gamut from really nice, if somewhat dour people to the worst aspects of Christianity and Islam thrown together with a bunch of crazy flamethrowers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of cool. Like, even within the Menoth Face, it has its own country. Even within there, it's run mostly by the ravening lunatics, law for law's sake kind of deal, who are frankly evil. And even within that, you have very, very good people trying to do good deeds, and that's cool.
Yep, I agree. That's definitely neat.
And then you've got Lord Tarok, who throws a wrench into everything.
Well, yeah, because he's yeah.
Yeah, Lord Tarok is the Dragon Father. He is for all intents and purposes a god, but has his own country, is corporeal, and has been known to absolutely destroy things because it annoyed him. He just can't right now because his children would eat him.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, the little I know about the Iron Kingdom's sort of pantheon is interesting. I've not again paid too much attention to it because I've never really looked much into playing in a Iron Kingdom's campaign because I just really haven't had the opportunity.
Right.
Also, it used to be based on 3.5, and that really wasn't my cup of tea.
That's fair enough. I'd like I said, I'd love to run it, but I just
yeah. Understand completely. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of other sort of pantheons I can think of. I mean, when you talk about Mythos doesn't just include deities and such, but we'll stick with that for the moment.
Well, a lot of games I've run and just import real world mythoses,
mythologies,
mythologies. There we go.
Yeah,
and pantheons. Into them.
Yeah. I mean, most of the D&D games I've run, I usually just use the stock ones just because it saves me time. So I hate to say it, but I really can't be asked to think about coming up with my own pantheon a lot of the time, and especially in D&D.
In the first D&D game I was in about a year ago, I was playing the cleric, and therefore it fell to me to come up with the gods. So I decided to base them all off of 8-bit Nintendo game characters. And I called it the Nintendo Faith.
Okay, that's different, but it's amusing. I like it. Oh God, yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. The Thursday night game I'm playing a cleric. I'm a dwarven cleric, so I said, yeah, Moradin, done, go.
Right.
It's like, yeah, I know something about Moradin. I really not, I don't have to think about it. I don't want to come up with my own deity. I don't want to have to put effort into this because I just don't care.
No, it is kind of cool to come up with your own belief system for your character.
Yep.
You saw me starting to do that with the barbarian in that game on Mondays.
Yep.
And how it was completely contrary to everyone else's.
Yep. I'm cool with that. I love it when players do that. Which is part of the reason I tend not to go into a lot of detail with my deities, because I'd rather leave that if the players want to have their characters be more sort of faith-based. I want them to come up with their own sort of angle on it because it's their own character, and but yeah, I the only times I've ever really come up with my own sort of set of deities and such, the fantasy hero game I was running, I sort of had my own set there because I had a concept for it, but they were sort of
there were more concepts and icons.
Yeah, and they were largely not. They were, unlike a lot of fantasy worlds, the deities really didn't have much direct impact on the world because there were storyline reasons why.
And honestly, I kind of like when deities don't have in a fantasy world don't have directed obvious influence, because that brings in more. That makes the faith of characters that have it all the more important.
Yeah, that's actually a significant part of the reason why I did that.
Yeah, and from a guy who's basically an atheist, I really respect faith, and I think it should be something like that in a fantasy game.
Yeah, I agree. That's sort of where I come from. That also. Yeah, that's the thing. That fantasy, again, it's a game I want. It's a fantasy world I want to run again. I just need to find a game system that it'll work for. I mean, Harrison works perfectly for it, but I need to find the right group for it. I guess I don't know. I like the game world concept, but it wouldn't. I don't think it would work particularly well in D&D, for instance.
Right.
I won't go into the full details on it because it's. I mean, I could spend hours talking about that game. It draws some concepts from other bits of fiction here and there. For instance, there are concepts in it that I took directly from Ursula K. Le Guin's. God, what's the name of the series? Crap.
Rincewind, you said?
Not Rincewind at all.
Oh, okay.
Ursula K. Le Guin.
I am completely derping. My brain is immediately shut off.
Oh, the Wizard of Earthsea books. That's what it is.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah, I drew. Yeah, so I drew heavily on those for some ideas. And I think it was definitely so the basic concept was the power. Basically, it was based on sort of the concept that something's true name is what actually basically is that thing's actual essence, effectively. And so the creator gods are the ones that basically gave names to everything. And so there were the ones that gave the namers, which were the ones that gave the names, and then there were the sort of the unnamed were the ones that the only things that sort of existed that don't have a name, and they're sort of the forces of chaos to a certain degree. And the whole point was basically the namers basically locked the unnamed away, but by doing so they really can't have a direct influence in the world, because if they do, then the unnamed can get free and such, and blah da 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 da.
And all sorts of trouble there. That's speaking of chaos, the chaos gods of Warhammer and Warhammer 40k are another really cool pantheon that is always malevolent. You really can't do good guy chaos. But you can do interesting things. You can do some really interesting things with it, also.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, and for the fantasy world, I'm thinking about it. Outside of Sigmar, who is not really a god, but is worshipped as one,
and he's not really a nice guy either.
Well, that's because it's Warhammer. It's the Warhammer world. There are no nice guys. I'm trying to think of other deities in that, and like outside the elven ones,
You've got Ulrich the Wolf God.
Oh, right, I forgot Ulrich. That's right.
And Mor, the God of the Dead.
Okay, I didn't know that one. I did not know that one.
Shamalama Ding Dong is what I want to call her, even though I know that's entirely wrong. She's sort of the goddess of healing.
Okay.
But they're such minor players on the stage that they're not important when you're playing the tabletop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I honestly, having played Warhammer as long as I honestly could not tell you any of the deities outside of the Chaos Gods and Sigmar, and I'd forgotten Ulrich, but beyond that,
the dwarves don't even really have gods.
No, they don't.
A whole ancestor worship thing. You've got the elven gods, Oberon and Azeroth and whatnot.
Right.
You've got the Horned Rat. You've got Gork and Mork.
Oh, I'd forgotten those. Yeah, of course the Horned Rat and Gork and Mork. Duh, but.
Gork and Mork are Gork and Mork, and the Horned Rat is, for all intents and purposes, a minor chaos deity.
Yeah. But like it's one of those. The Chaos Gods are interesting evil gods, but the rest of the Pantheon sort of goes boink off of me.
Fair enough.
It's sort of Gork and Mork are fun, but.
And even the orcs don't even really take them that seriously.
Right. But there isn't really a human pantheon. Is the weird thing.
Yeah, you've got Sigmar. You've got, I think the Bretonia has this whole Lady of the Lake worship thing going on.
Right.
I never paid too much attention to Bretonia though, because French knights really weren't that interesting in a world where I could be monsters.
Yeah, it's interesting. But thinking about it, I know a lot about the Warhammer Fantasy world, and I really don't know much about their deities because they're really not that well fleshed out outside of the Chaos Gods.
But the Chaos Gods are really, really cool. Just the idea of taking an aspect of of the human condition and bringing it to such an extreme that it warps in upon itself and becomes wholly malevolent. Mm-hmm. That's really cool. That's a neat idea.
Oh yeah, I think it's a neater idea than I think the designers actually originally intended.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah,
the idea. I mean, just like Zinch is for all intents and purposes a god of hope, but it's pulled to such an extreme and warped in upon itself so much that he goes from hope to change for change's sake and malevolent scheming and magic.
Mm-hmm.
But at its very, very core, deep down, you dig down all that stuff, it's hope. And Slaanesh is love. When you dig down through all the perversion and insanity and everything, it's love. And Khorne is well, Khorne's hate. The Khorne is probably the least complicated of the Chaos Gods.
Yeah, he really is.
There's a certain degree of purity that I respect there, but he's also somehow the least interesting.
Somehow?
Okay, fair enough.
Oh,
and
God.
Nurgle, you've got despair, but it's so warped and twisted in upon itself, it becomes this sort of fatalistic giddiness.
Yeah, weirdly, Nurgle is the most cheerful of the Chaos Gods.
Yeah.
And he's the god of entropy and despair. It's like, wait,
yeah.
What? Oh, God. But yeah, I mean, so I'm trying to, but outside of sort of the world specific ones that were written for their own games. I mean, if you want to start looking at some of the of course, another common thing that people do is importing pantheons from, as you mentioned, from our actual history.
Yep.
So I know a fair bit about both the Greek and Norse pantheons. I read a lot about both of them when I was young. I know a little bit about the Egyptian pantheon.
Yeah, the Egyptian pantheon. I was really into Egyptology and the Egyptian mythologies when I was like 8 and 9, and it's largely been lost through the mists of time.
Yeah, I've always found them interesting, but I don't know them as well as I'd like to. Honestly, it's one of those things I keep meaning to do more research on, but I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. Same with the Sumerian gods. I'd really like to do more research on them.
Honestly, I don't know much of anything about the Sumerian gods beyond Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven. I'm beyond that story.
Yeah.
and Baal, but I think Baal was Parthian?
I don't remember.
Baal was a contemporary to the Roman gods. I think he was from he was Carthaginian. That's it.
Okay. Sure. But yeah, there are a bunch of pantheons out there that I would love to know more about. Like, I'd like to know a lot more about the Chinese gods.
Yes.
Than I do. I mean, I know a little bit. I know a little bit about Sun Wukong. He's the one I know most about because of my love of martial arts movies. Meant that I got exposed to a lot of stuff about his mythology, and therefore went and looked into him more because the Monkey King is awesome.
Yes. And yeah, Chinese mythology in general is sort of this weird alien thing to me that I kind of want to know more about, but I sort of, at the same time, I find vaguely impenetrable.
Yeah, I can see that. I know almost nothing about the Japanese mythology. I know who Amaterasu. Can't pronounce it all of a sudden. Amaterasu, I think, is how it's pronounced, but I know a little bit about that, about that, but I don't know anything anywhere near enough about it. I mean, I know more about the sort of more modern stuff with him, sort of. But I honestly, it's like I don't know much about that, and I know. Unsurprisingly, I know more about sort of the European mythos stuff, because that's I'm from the United States, and
right,
we've got a lot more closer ties to Europe historically, so.
And yeah, I make no bones about being fairly Eurocentric in my mythologies. Not just Eurocentric, Norsocentric.
Yeah, I know. We both know a fair bit about the Norse mythologies for obvious reasons. Both of us being of Scandinavian descent.
My name is Thor.
Yeah.
Quite literally, folks, my middle name is Thor. It's on the birth certificate and everything.
So yeah, my mom literally is from Sweden. I mean, she moved here in '67.
Right.
And so I grew up around a lot of my mom had a lot of stuff, books on Norse mythology and such, and so I've read through them, and I know a lot about. So I grew up knowing a lot about Norse mythology. And when I was in elementary school, we studied a lot about Greek mythology too, and I always thought that was interesting.
Yep.
Of course, looking back at it now, dear God, a lot of the Greek gods are dicks.
Yes. Although I gotta say, like, in modern representations, Hades gets a bad rap.
Oh God, yeah, Hades is awesome. Hades is one of the least assholish of the bunch.
Yeah, like
outside that whole
you see modern representations of Hades is always this giant necromorph monstrosity who's all bent on destroying all of humanity and bringing them into the realm of his dead. But if you actually read the stories, it's really just sort of an introverted guy with kind of awkward social skills that really just wants to be left alone.
Yeah. Basically, the one real dick move he did was the whole thing with Persephone, and that's really about it.
Yeah, and that was less of a dick move and more going, I'm lonely and I don't know how to express that.
Yeah, pretty much. Poor Hades. The problem is Hades gets tainted with, because he's the god of death. He gets tainted with a lot of the sort of the more modern sort of takes on that, and so yeah, he definitely gets the shaft.
He totally gets a bad rap, and it's. I mean, seriously, you want an evil Greek god? Just use Zeus.
Zeus is an asshole.
Zeus is a murderer and rapist.
God, he's awful. Oh God. Ugh. Yeah, Tachi's right. He's not even God's death. He's not even the god of death. He's death's boss.
Yeah. Thanos was death. That's entirely correct.
He's the guy who basically makes sure he's in charge of the underworld, and it's. Oh God. So yeah, I mean, the Greek Pantheon's fascinating. There's a lot of great mythology, but dear God, they're jerks.
They're all raging cockbags.
Yeah. And part of that was because it's interesting looking at it, sort of thinking about, like, it's a very different. I mean, they're again sort of takes on sort of the human condition and such,
right?
Sort of turned up to 11 basically. And it's interesting looking at that is they're not really intended to be sort of paragons and not looked up to. They're just sort of
representations of what you do.
Right, exactly. They're
brought to an extreme. They're kind of like the Chaos Gods in that respect.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting that, like, a lot of those gods, they're not, again, supposed to be sort of the they're not, as I said, they're not paragons. Like the Norse gods, they're mortal.
Yeah. The whole idea behind the Norse gods being mortal is that you can't really be a hero if you can't die.
Right. They die of old age if they don't eat the golden apples. I mean,
yeah, there's actually a huge, really interesting story about that happening.
Right.
Someone nicks their apples. They're like, oh, fuck.
Right.
and yeah, I mean, and what's more, the Norse gods are they're closer to being paragons, but they're like you said, they're mortal, and they're as such, they're also incredibly fallible.
Right.
Like, they fuck up, and the intention of them fucking up is so that you learn not to do that.
Right. I honestly think the Norse gods are much more interesting than the Greek ones, personally.
Absolutely.
But like Thor is this paragon of strength and valor, and he's a moron.
Yeah, he is dumb as a stump. For all of his antagonism with Loki, Loki is absolutely his outboard brain.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about the whole story is that Loki is, while in the end the antagonist, for a long time he's really like one of their greatest allies, and is not that bad a guy for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, he's a sneaky little toe rag, but
he's a bit of a dick, and he does some really very unnice things, but eventually they screw him over hardcore, and it ends up being they end up paying for it.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, he did kill Baldur.
Yeah, and that was the one really awful thing he did, and
of course, to be fair, he did get them all those awesome magic weapons, and then they laughed at him when the dwarf sewed his mouth shut.
Yeah.
So everyone's been a dick to everyone else in Norse mythology at some point.
Yeah. Well, again, it's they're all fallible. I mean,
exactly.
It's really the Norse mythology is fascinating stuff. There's other mythology in Europe that I don't know as well. I mean, a lot of times
Celtic mythology is this really weird, ill-defined thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're basically pulling it from a bunch of different tribes, none of which are terribly well recorded.
Right. Yeah.
And what you can find is this weird sort of hodgepodge. The only consistent thing is how to deal with fairies, which the best option is not to.
How to deal with fairies? Don't. That really is the big lesson you pick up from Celtic mythologies.
Yes.
If you encounter fairies, don't agree to anything. Don't do anything. Preferably
say hello and walk away. And they don't take an interest in you. You don't ever want to be rude to fairies.
No, dear Lord, no. I mean, like, you know, I think people have heard me sort of joke about in the Lord of the Rings stuff. If you read the Silmarillion, about how, you know, the elves are doomed, and their doom is so bad it dooms other people. It's the dooming doom of the doomed Eldar. Yeah. That actually basically ties directly into Celtic mythology, because, like, you know, seeing a fae being in Celtic mythology is usually bad for you.
Yes,
and that really ties into the way the elves operate in Lord of the Rings. It's when, you know, that's where that comes from. Because, you know, Lord of the Rings draws heavily on Celtic mythology for part of its
and Norse mythology, and pretty much every Northern European mythology.
Well, yeah, that was Tolkien's intent.
Yeah, and it's a great fusion of them.
Oh, it's brilliant. But, you know, again, it's the dooming doom of the doomed Eldar. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, really, it's a doom that dooms other people. My third cousin once saw an elf, therefore I'm screwed over. What? How is this? Okay, fine.
Don't question it. Fairy magic.
Also, Fëanor was an idiot, but
yeah, that too.
Oh boy.
But, like, even in Celtic mythology, even if you manage to get something good out of a fairy, like Cuchulainn becomes invincible in battle. He cannot be defeated. And this is awesome. Except he could never refuse hospitality. Whatever. I like to eat. I like to drink. Who cares? You could never eat the flesh of a dog. Who eats dogs? Hey, Sonny, would you like some dog?
Oh. Poor Cuchulainn. Yeah, I remember at one point. There's lots of interesting little bits of mythology that, you know, honestly, in a lot of that mythology, the more interesting characters aren't the gods themselves, but the heroes in the mythology.
Yes.
Like, I remember, of course, this is a mixed bag. Like, you know, Hercules is not really, if you read his mythology, he's not really the most interesting of characters.
This is true.
Honestly, the most interesting of the Greek heroes, in my personal opinion, is Odysseus, because he's the
original goth kid.
He's the least archetypical Greek hero, because he's, you know, unlike almost every Greek hero, he's not about the fact that he's the one who thinks.
Yeah.
And his favorite weapon is the one that most Greek warriors kind of found a little bit dishonorable, which is the bow. Because he's like, well, yeah. Fuck getting up in melee. If I can kill you from far away, I'll kill you from far away. Therefore, you can't kill me back. Because I'm not an idiot. Because Odysseus was smart. Unlike was it Ajax, one of the Ajax is the one who cursed out Poseidon. That was dumb.
Oh yeah.
Ha! I beat you. You didn't. Your storm didn't kill me. Earthquake. Oh.
Oh, god damn it! Remind me not to damn the gods.
Yeah. Well, you're dead now. Sorry. Yeah, Darthvolt in the chat just mentioned. I've heard the comparison that Hercules is Superman and Odysseus is Batman. That's largely true.
Yes, especially considering Hercules, well, sometimes kind of a dick because he is a Greek character, a Greek mythological character, I should stipulate. He is probably the overall nicest guy they've got.
He's up there. Yeah, although they don't interact a whole lot. You actually get more. You get more of that feel when you look at the interactions between Odysseus and Achilles. Because Achilles is the invulnerable warrior with one weakness. Sounds familiar?
Yeah. Yeah. And he was played by Brad Pitt.
We don't discuss that movie, Eric.
Yes, we do. We do it to cause you pain.
Actually, honestly, there's some fantastic fight scenes in that movie. I have to give that movie credit for that.
Yeah.
And and that movie drives home the point that honestly, in the Odyssey, there are two really awesome characters whom you actually feel any sympathy for. One of them is Odysseus, and the other is Hector.
Yeah.
Hector is awesome. He's just doomed.
Dude, can't I just live with my wife? I mean, she chose me. No, yeah, I did. Shut up, you're a woman. You don't get a choice.
Oh no, he's not even the one who has Helen. That's Paris.
That's right. You're right. That is Paris.
Hector is just the prince of the prince of I can't remember the name of the city. Also, Troy.
Troy, yeah.
And he's Troy's great hero, and he's a great guy. Wonderful, great. He's one of the best people in the entire Iliad. And unfortunately, he has to fight Achilles.
Yeah.
And as badass as Hector is, Achilles is invulnerable. And also incredibly good at what he does.
Yes. And wore Doc Martens.
At any rate, but my point on this was there was a class I took on mythology in college, and we were sort of supposed to do sort of compare and contrast with some various mythological figures. And with some of the we were given a bunch of pairings, and the one I ended up doing was comparing. If I remember correctly, it was Hercules and what's his name from Norse mythology? Crap, I'm blanking.
Tyr?
No.
Thor? Odin?
Beowulf.
Beowulf.
Because there are certain similarities between the two, but I ended up concluding that Beowulf is a much more interesting character than Hercules was. And honestly, a better comparison for Beowulf is Odysseus, really, because they're both smart warriors.
Although Beowulf is it's considerably more brutish than Odysseus.
Oh, he is, absolutely, because it's
Norse mythology.
Right, exactly. Beowulf's an interesting character, but
yeah, Beowulf is kind of awesome.
Has an unfortunate end, but he dies kind of like
he has a very Norse end.
Well, mind you, he goes all like a badass.
Yeah, it's a Nordic story. It's all about doomed heroism.
He goes out taking out a dragon at when he's old man. I mean, that's pretty bad for a Norse hero. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I fought a dragon. I mean, it killed me, but I killed it, so yeah.
Yeah. Beowulf was awesome.
Mahala, bitches.
Beowulf is not Batman. He's
Beowulf is Guy Gardner.
Yeah, kinda. Yeah. He's smart, but not like, sort of educated smart. He's just smart. He's got a brain, and he's a bit of a thug.
Yeah. Moon Knight?
Maybe. But yeah, as I said, you can tell that I care more about sort of actual mythology and mythos than I do about most of the created mythos for role playing games. Mostly because there are reasons they were created, and they have a lot more. There's a lot more time behind them, I think. And
there's a lot more time. There's a much greater dearth of information available.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Although I gotta say, if you're going with like the Chaos Gods, like there's 25 years of everyone spilling every drop of ink they could get their hands on about the Chaos Gods. So
yeah, there's a lot of info on them,
and a lot of it's contradictory, as is as one would expect when it's called the Chaos Gods.
Well, honestly, it makes that actually adds more to a bit of a level of verisimilitude to it, because that's how a lot of mythology is. It's actually very contradictory. A lot of it contradicts itself. Actually, another one of my favorite. I'm just thinking about it. This has nothing to do with that, but another one of my favorite of the Greek heroes is, and who has quite possibly the worst end of any of them, because the rest of the story is awesome, but then like the end of his story is just like, oh god, why? Is poor Jason.
Oh, the Argonauts. Right.
Because he has this great story, everything goes well, and then he makes one really, really stupid move to basically ditching Medea. His witch of a wife is this woman he falls in love with, who's a powerful sorceress, and then he ditches her when he gets back home, and she basically says "fuck you," and he dies old, alone, with the bowsprit of his boat falling on his head.
Yeah, to be fair, it's like, I've been with you through all of this. I've saved your life countless times, and now you're just going to leave me at your home? What, witches aren't good enough for you all of a sudden?
Jason, his death is... The thing is, again, his death is sort of appropriate, but it's really sort of like, wow, talk about an ignominious end.
Yeah.
A piece of wood falls on your head and you die. After all his tales and travels, Bonk's dead. As opposed to Odysseus, whose end is he gets a happy ending. Yeah. He's like one of the only Greek heroes who does.
Well, he didn't take a witch for a lover, then dump her as soon as he got home.
Yeah, he did have a witch for a lover for a while, but that's when he was stuck on her island with Circe.
Yeah.
And he ditched her, and she didn't follow him. He's like, I'm gone.
All right.
I'm going home to my actual wife.
I heard about what happened with this Jason guy. I'm just going to sneak out in the night and make sure you have no idea where I went.
Not quite that, but yeah. He goes back home, and his wife has been faithful to him, astonishingly. Yeah. The ending of that, his ending, it's a cool story. I mean, admittedly, he goes a little bit nuts on all of his wife's suitors, because it's a Greek story, and
right.
But
everyone's got to die at some point. It's like early Shakespeare.
Well, the big thing. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. There are a bunch of mythologies I want to know more about. But the other thing I want to touch on a little bit is that when we talk about mythos, we don't have to talk about entirely just about sort of your archetypical sort of pantheon of gods and such.
No, I mean we can also talk about the gods in history, not the. I just said gods. The heroes and histories involved also.
Yeah, I'm thinking more along the lines of the sort of the mythology doesn't just involve the deities and such. I mean, well, what I'm thinking of does technically count, sort of referred to as deities. But they really aren't what most people think of as such. Which I'm thinking of along lines like the mythos of Call of Cthulhu, for instance.
Yeah, the entities, the entities of the Cthulhu mythos aren't really gods. They don't require your faith. They don't ask for it. They don't care about it.
Nope. But
you are so far beneath them that really they couldn't give a shit. They might be annoyed that you're hanging out on their planet when they wake up.
Yep. So yeah, there's a lot. There are a bunch of games that have stuff like that also. I haven't played many of them personally outside of Call of Cthulhu, really.
Yeah, but the Cthulhu mythos gets pulled into everything.
Yeah, it does really.
At one point or another.
Or elements,
because it's such an interesting idea. The universe doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about humanity as a whole. You're a minor annoyance to entities older and more terrible than you are capable of comprehending.
Right. And there's a lot that gets drawn into a lot of things, and there are definitely elements of that in the Chaos Gods in Warhammer, for instance.
Yes. Although the Chaos Gods are, in contrast, very much do want your faith, very much do want your worship.
Yep. You actually see a lot of the sort of Cthulhu sort of type of mythos in sort of the weirder science fiction-y type games also. I'm trying to think of anything off the top of my head, but
there's a bit of it in Traveler.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hints, but nothing's spelled out, and the hints are usually, and then this terrible thing happened, by things you'd best not ask about. Moving on.
Yeah, Lizodiac in the chat points out like the Reapers from Mass Effect. There's definite effect.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. The Reapers from Mass Effect are textbook examples of old ones.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So
they're just machines instead of fleshy. However you'd want to describe Cthulhu.
You don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you talk about Mythos, a lot of the elements that we're talking about, sort of, the a lot of what we're talking about with these pantheons of deities and the heroes and such, it's not just that they're creating this sort of pantheon. They're also, as Eric pointed out very early on, they're providing a lot of background for the world and sort of providing sort of like a deep back history. And a lot of that comes into, like, you can sort of look at sort of the background history for like almost any game world as being sort of a mythos.
Yes.
Honestly, that term really applies to a lot of sort of superhero games. Actually, thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you've got deities and such in there, but like the back history of various older heroes and such, and how superpowers came about, and all that sort of thing, ties in a lot to sort of has a lot of the feel of talking about sort of pantheon, like the old great heroes. It's sort of almost like the pantheon of a superhero universe in a large way.
I mean, we've got a mythos in the Mutants Masterminds game with Apex and Superiana. I mean, we pretty much just teamed up with Hector to beat up Ajax.
Pretty much, yeah. And the Goblin Queen.
Gideon, was that Gabriel?
Gabriel.
Even Berkelak.
Yeah, Berkelak. You've got Baron von Toten, Archon.
Yep. Names that make people go, ugh.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of stuff like that, and and you're getting hints about the Skrix and such, and who they really are, and
we flew through their space. Right on from giant space tarantulas.
That's a different game. I kept the name of some concepts from the sci-fi game, but the Mutants Mastermind Skrix are very different.
They are. They're much more expansionistic and aggressive for one.
Yep. Lizodiac also points out that events are also a big part of mythology. Like the second impact from Evangelion. Absolutely. Yes. Honestly, there's the events are the big part of the mythos in Star City, for instance. The Goblin Queen's rampage. The
big fight between Von Toten and Archon.
Archon, right? The events involving Huak, which I detail in the background there, which ties into the whole Goblin Queen thing. It turned out, which is why Huak basically looked like it was working, was going well, and that was what sort of completely derailed. It's like, oh, huh. She worked for Senator McCarthy, which is like, bad. Oops.
Well, in Iron Kingdoms, you've got the Orgoth occupation and the rebellion.
Right.
You've got like the birth of the night of Crix and the Nightmare Empire when Lord Torok decides I'm going to hang out here for the rest of eternity.
Right. So all this stuff is actually really important. And as much as I said, as when I said earlier on, when we started out, I mentioned I don't really find the deities and such in most fantasy games particularly interesting. That's definitely true. I don't really sort of focus a lot on them, but I do focus a lot on the rest of the mythos of a fantasy world when I'm creating one. Because while I think the deities are they're definitely important, they're not the most interesting part of it for me for the most part. And I'd rather let the players sort of develop their own sort of relationships with the gods on their own, for various reasons. Largely because I like giving the players a lot of agency on that sort of thing, so they have their ability to define their characters and have their own relationships with various things on their own.
One of the things I like but annoys me about, say, 4th edition is Baal Turoth and Ashkaroth. The Tiefling homeland and the Dragonborn homeland.
Arcosia, yes.
Yes, and how they sort of They have this big war, and it's something that only ever is like mentioned offhandedly, and hints are dropped about. And I think that's somehow appropriate for an ancient war. You know, there's an ancient war. You know, this happened. This is the fallout. That's all you know. It gets mentioned every once in a while in an ancient scroll or a legend, but yeah.
Yeah, I took that and ran with that in the campaign world I've run multiple times in 4th Ed, which I ran with you guys and then ran the Shadowland campaign. The thing I think a lot of people miss, this is actually something I do want to touch on, that a lot of people miss in the 4th edition book, and what a lot of people complained about was that how sketchy the details on the stuff was, and that was actually intentional in the 4th Ed book, because they weren't trying to present you with a full framed-on game world. They were trying to present you with a bit of a framework that you could build your own game world off of easily.
Yeah.
And so they got this, there's a concept of the whole war between Baal Taroth and Arcosia. There's frameworks to the deities, so you can hang whatever you want to off of them and tie things in the way you want to together. It's not intended to be a fully fledged game world. It's sort of a framework for one, and I think a lot of people I don't think they were clear enough in that to start
and it's something that's always been part of the core D&D rules, is that they'll give you the seeds of something, but that's it. You actually gotta plant them, provide water and sunlight and all that other good stuff.
Yep. Yeah, that's the thing, is there are a lot of people who are talking about they were talking about the people are sort of complaining about how the deities aren't that well developed and such, and there's not much world detail in the 4th Ed rulebook compared to the 3rd Ed rulebook, but there really wasn't that much in the 3rd Ed rulebook either.
No, there was a similar amount of stuff. You had bare bones gods, some hints about something that may have happened in the past that you could use if you wanted to, or ignore, and that was about it.
Yeah. But anyways,
some big names get used in the names of spells, like Big B's crushing hand and whatnot.
Well, yeah, the Big B stuff, all that stuff ties back to the original campaigns that created this way back when.
Yes.
Why the wizard Big B was obsessed with spells based around hands, I don't know, but
there's always a Big B's crushing hand, always, or it's not Dungeons and Dragons.
Anyways, so I think we've talked on long enough about Mythos for today, at least. We do have at least one email question I want to get to before we wrap things up, and we're getting to the point where we probably should do that now. So, we got another email question from Peter Magnuson, who thanked us for our help on his question about the whole campaign where everyone's a traitor trying to kill everyone else thing. He's got one more thing he'd like some help with. He says, however, one more thing I need help with. You see, I've been taking a look at GURPS for the past couple of weeks, and it looks pretty good, but I'm a bit unsure when it comes to the complexity of it. Do you guys think that the good things about GURPS outweigh the problems, especially when it comes to the ratio of complexity versus creative freedom? Yes.
The great thing about GURPS, it's very much a system where you can take and leave parts of it.
Yeah,
you can pretty much cherry pick the stuff you like.
Yeah, for instance, honestly, it's not. I don't think it's that complex unless you start getting to the advanced combat rules,
which can get very complex and minutia-driven, and frankly, just leave those aside.
That's my personal take. I'm not a big fan of.
If you want something that complex, go play Rollmaster.
No, stick with the GURPS thing because
never mind. No one should play Rollmaster.
No, the GURPS combat system actually makes more sense. It's just very, very intricate, methodical, and detailed. Again, I would say I definitely think that the creative freedom does outweigh the complexity, for me at least. The one thing that you have to keep an eye on with any point-based system is this is true in any point-based system. It's going to happen. Is that there are a lot of opportunities to really heavily min-max, and it's just going to happen no matter what. You can't.
Sometimes unintentionally.
Yeah. So the game master does have to take a good look at the characters and look at things and make sure that things are within expected bounds of acceptability for the campaign you're aiming for. Because characters can end up more powerful than the player intended, or the players just enjoy min-maxing and built a very, very, very efficient character. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but if it's too powerful for the campaign you're going for, you can ask them to tone it back, and most players will do so as long as you approach them in a reasonable fashion.
Dude, I understand that you want to play a small fluffy bunny in my Grim Dark Future game, which is why I'm okay with you having sentient chain guns mounted to your back, but do you really need to have the mecha built into your ass also?
Yeah, so, it's, again, just be reasonable about it. But yeah, long story short, I think Eric and I both agree on this, that while GURPS, in some ways GURPS is definitely more complex than a lot of other RPGs because of the creative freedom you have in making the characters. It's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, you can make that. That's something I really like about point-based games in general. Also, you never feel like you get screwed by the dice.
Yep.
And I'm gonna say right now, it doesn't matter how well you roll, you will eventually feel screwed by the dice. Do it when you're making your character. Like, yeah, I can't roll characters anymore. I have to use points.
Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of my sort of take on that. I would say it's an opportunity cost, In order to get the level of creative freedom you have in a system like that, you have to accept some complexity. Otherwise, it will be, if there isn't some complexity in it, it's usually because it's not been well thought out.
Yes.
So
again, with point-based systems, you gotta watch out for balance, because while you have all this freedom, with all that freedom comes a great potential for abuse, whether intentional or not. So you gotta watch out for that.
Yeah, and again, the other thing you have to know is that what one person views as balance is not necessarily the same for someone else. And especially when players are all creating their characters and then you're looking at them as a whole, you can see there might be imbalances between different characters, and that might be okay. But it's something to keep in mind and something to make sure that the players are aware of, that, these things are, that what one person designed as what they thought might be effective is not as efficiently designed as someone else's. And as long as they're okay with that, that's fine. But it can lead to problems if you're not careful about it. You basically just have to keep it in mind, is the long and short of it. I think that basically covers that, though.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let me take a quick look, see if we've got any other questions on the forums. Forums. Yeah, I think that really, unless we have a question in the forums, I think it's going to wrap things up for today. The forums are loading very slowly for some reason. Load faster, you stupid thing. Okay, well, the forums are going to take a while to load. So if there's another question, we'll get to it next week, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
So before we go, Eric, any last thoughts on Mythos or Pantheons or anything like that?
They are cool, and you should endeavor to include them in your games, although they are not necessary.
Yeah, I can see that. I basically agree. I think they're important. They're not critical. They're not essential, but
they're not essential. But they can add a lot of depth, more than you might realize.
I would agree with that completely. Other than that, guys, thanks to our live audience today for watching. I hope everybody had a good time. We had a good time as usual doing the show. If you have questions that you'd like answered on the show, or if you have show topics, suggestions, or feedback for us, either criticism or what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, what have you, we love getting feedback, and you can always send it to us. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com. You can also post them on our forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com. Or I guess you can hit me up on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @mechagm. You can also find me on both Facebook and Google+. My Peter Bowman in both places. Yeah, so but we want feedback. We want questions. We want all that stuff. Please give it to us. Other than that, I think that's it for this week, right, Eric?
I think so, yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. So thanks for listening, guys, and we will see you guys next week, same time, same channel. And until then, keep on gaming, guys. Take care.
Bye.